Uh, well, I am Van Jones, and I can't tell you how honored I am to be here today. Every now and again, you have a documentary that is more of a 4 alarm or 5 alarm fire that the world needs to pay attention to. And coded bias is one of those. You think about inconvenient truth and the way that it put the world on notice about the dangers of climate change when most people, frankly, hadn't been thinking about it at all. This is a clear and present danger, as you just saw in this trailer, that technology, which we thought was going to take us into a better future, might actually drag the worst of the past behind it, encode it, and weaponize it in ways that we can't even fathom. So we owe a tremendous debt to this film, to the people who are part of this film, and to the filmmaker. I am a CNN commentator. Most people know me from that role, if they know me at all. But I've actually spent the past 25 years of my life working on criminal justice reform, police reform, and those issues, and trying to use the tools of law and media and journalism to redress and address the issues of bias in the criminal justice system that we have right now, which is mainly an analog system. I would have hoped and prayed that as we moved into a more digital environment, we could get the bias out. Instead, it looks like we are now in danger of encoding bias in a whole different way in this century. In order to get our minds wrapped around what this documentary is trying to convey, we are lucky to have an incredible panel. These people in the same society would be household names already. I will be introducing them to you. We're also going to get a chance to hear from the filmmaker herself, Shalini. But let me just introduce the panel really quickly. We have Joy, the so-called poet of code. She's the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League. How 21st century is that? The Algorithmic Justice League. She's called the poet of code. She uses art and research to illuminate all of the social implications of artificial intelligence. Now, we live in a world with a lot of data, not very much wisdom. Joy is a real purveyor of wisdom, as you're going to see, and she's one of the big stars of this documentary. Claire Garvey is going to join us. She's a center. She's a fellow, a law fellow at the center. She comes out of Georgetown Law. She's the author, most importantly, of not one, not two, but 3 different reports on facial recognition. She's testified in front of Congress about the way that the police can use and misuse this kind of technology. We're also going to have Cade Crockford, Director of Technology for Liberty at the ACLU, Massachusetts. She's also an MIT Media Lab Director's Fellow. I was one of those at one point in my younger days. MIT, you can tell the kind of brain power she's bringing to this fight. She works to protect and expand core First and Fourth Amendment rights in the digital 21st century. And last but not least, I'm super excited. My longtime friend, my sister, who I love so much, Shalini Kantaya. She's the director of this film, this documentary called Coded Bias. It premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. She's also done stuff with National Geographic Television. She's worked with Ron Howard. She also did a documentary called Catching the Sun, which got a New York Times critic pick and a bunch of other awards. And I was in that documentary. So I've known Shalini for a very, very long time. We're going to hear from these folks. Then we're going to get questions. And if you want to ask a question, you can be a part of the conversation on Twitter. But in order to do that, you got to use the hashtag coded bias. That would be the hashtag that you would use, coded bias. So let's get started. I want to start with Shalini. This is your film. You're always doing crazy stuff. Your first film was talking about solar technology in China and the United States. Nobody was thinking about this stuff. You put it on the map. Why did you decide to work on this issue for this documentary?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Van. I just want to take a moment to give some thanks. I want to cordially welcome you to the national virtual cinema release of Coded Bias. It means so much to have you here with me tonight. I cannot express how much I'm missing seeing your face in the cinema. But I want to thank everyone who went to the Coded Bias website and found their local cinema and supported our opening weekend, and a local cinema surviving through this pandemic. And I am told that Coded Bias is opening tonight in 71 cinemas in all 50 states across the country. And I couldn't be more thrilled to share the voices of this film with you. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank the Coolidge Corner Theater for this incredible platform to present this work and to share this conversation, and Sloan Science on Screen for helping us share this story. We're in an age where we are just seeing how important science communication is to deal with the most important crisis of our times. And I want to thank Sloan Science on Screen for helping filmmakers be part of that process of vital science communication. And I have to thank the brilliant and badass cast of this film, the mostly women data scientists and mathematicians, for giving me an education and allowing me to share their stories in Coded Bias. It's an honor and a privilege to share their stories with you. And then I just want to say, just to answer your question, Van, it's, a few years ago, I didn't even know what an algorithm was. I'm sort of a sci-fi fanatic. I've watched Blade Runner too many times. I love technology. And I sort of stumbled upon a TED Talk that the brilliant Joy Buolamwini did, and then read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neil. And then I read a book called Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble, and Artificial Intelligence by Meredith Broussard. Sort of stumbled down this rabbit hole of sort of this dark underbelly of big tech algorithms. And I think coming from outside the industry, I did not understand. I think everything that I knew about AI was from the mind of Spielberg and Kubrick. And I did not understand that already today, AI is making decisions as intimate as who gets what quality of healthcare, who gets a job, who gets into college, how long a prison sentence someone serves, who gets undue police scrutiny. And through the incredible work, much of the people on this panel, I realized that this is where the battle for civil rights will happen in the 21st century. And I just want to share that, I make documentaries because they remind me that everyday people can make a difference. And that's never been more true in the making of Coded Bias. In June, because I think these things can feel hopeful and way beyond us. And in June, we had sea change that I never thought was possible in the making of this film, which is 3 of the largest tech companies changed their policy on invasive surveillance, racially biased technology. IBM said it would not research or sell this stuff to law enforcement. Microsoft said it would stop selling to law enforcement, and Amazon said it would put a 1-year pause of sale of facial recognition to law enforcement. And that sea change was brought about by, in part by Joy Buolamwini's groundbreaking research, along with her colleagues, proving that this technology was racially biased. But also, she saved us, because this wasn't in a lab somewhere. This was like actively being sold to the FBI and to ICE and to police departments across the country. And they put their academic reputations on the line and spoke truth to power, and then engaged citizens in the largest sort of movement for civil rights that we've seen in 50 years. And people like Cade organized people and sort of created that sea change. And so I feel like in the making of this film, I've seen a recipe of what's possible. And I think because of the work in part of people on this panel, that we have a moonshot moment for ethics in technology. And so I just want to say that I'm so grateful to be here, and it's been quite a ride, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, we're grateful to you. And before I start asking everybody else questions, I do just want to know, it's hard to make a documentary, and it takes so much dedication and so much time, and sometimes people don't appreciate that. I certainly do. What did you learn? What was the most surprising thing that you learned in the course of doing the documentary? You're always so much smarter at the end than at the beginning. What was the most surprising thing that you learned?
I didn't understand the extent to which algorithms that haven't been vetted for bias or even for accuracy, or that they won't hurt people, were already being deployed to make really important decisions that impact human destiny. And that's when I was like, oh, this is like the civil rights issue of our times. This is where the battle for all of our rights is going to go down.
No. Well, I appreciate you. I consider myself to be relatively well informed, and if you've not seen this documentary, you don't know. you might think you know, you don't know. But the people who are on this panel know an awful lot. Joy, this whole thing kind of starts with your discovery that you have a computer that's supposed to be recognizing faces, and it can't even see your face because you're of African descent. How did you start drawing these connections between a computer not even being able to recognize or see somebody who's African American, and yet probably, if this gets in the hands of the police, overuse of this technology against African Americans? Can you just draw the connection between those two seemingly disparate dots?
Oh, for sure. So I got to the MIT Media Lab. I was so excited. I'm at the epicenter of innovation. I'm working on this project, end up putting on a white mask to have my dark skin detected. And I mean, Fanon already said it, black skin, white mask. I just didn't think it would be so literal. So in that moment, my question was, what else might we think is neutral that could actually be biased? Because I recognize my background with computer science, computer vision, that the techniques that were being used to detect a face were also being applied in other areas, right? So if we're thinking about healthcare, if we're thinking about employment. And so the face was just the entry point. And to your point, it's not just about being seen, it's about having agency as well, because making Black faces more visible can then more so optimize oppression. So I think about cost of inclusion and cost of exclusion. But I knew silence wasn't the answer. So by showing that these issues existed, it was an invitation to question the narrative of superiority of large tech giants, right? So in my poem, AI Anti-Woman, we show Amazon labeling Oprah's face as male, right? We're showing that these systems that are oftentimes presented to us as being infallible from companies that supposedly have the best of the best creating it, in fact have errors. And so those errors are an invitation not just to say, let's make these systems better and then use it for mass surveillance, but let's question the whole apparatus and think about who's going to be harmed.
Yeah, I think that for us who are just now being exposed to this sort of stuff, it's a little bit of a shock. You've had a chance to really think this stuff through, think about it. What keeps you up at night in terms of what could law enforcement do accidentally, unknowingly, but with devastating effect if we don't do something about this bias that's being included in code and facial recognition?
Well, one of the major concerns when I first saw my own coding in the white mask was thinking about what happens with misidentifications. And I know that Kate and Claire can speak to this as well, but with the great work that ACLU was doing with Robert Williams, who was wrongfully arrested due to a false face recognition mismatch. And in the film, you see a 14-year-old boy, right, who's stopped and searched by the police due to a false recognition. Big Brother Watch UK, they released a report, 2,400 innocent people being misidentified. And so there's a real human cost to how these systems are deployed. And that's if they don't work. But even if they do work, and I don't know if Kate, you want to jump in here, right? But we have all sorts of chilling effects that happen. And then we have an assault on our First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and 14th Amendment rights as well. And so it's a case where it's not just let's make these systems more accurate for mass surveillance, but let's question the whole apparatus in the first place.
Well, that's helpful. Maybe, Kate, you could jump in. You're at the ACLU. You're working to protect and expand the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and all the other amendments. How is this kind of focus on these issues, these topics, relevant to you, and what are you trying to do about it?
Well, Joy's right. So we have a tagline for the campaign that we launched in my office in June of last year called Press Pause on Face Surveillance. And it is that this technology is dangerous when it works and when it doesn't. We have separate concerns, of course, about the problems that arise when government agencies like the police use technologies like this when they malfunction, particularly when there are systemic racial and gender bias issues with the technology, like the issues that Joy discovered and that the federal government's National Institute of Standards and Technology later confirmed and elaborated upon. We also have significant concerns about what happens when the technology gets it right. This technology, combined with the millions of surveillance cameras, especially in cities and towns across the country where there are networks of surveillance cameras linked together, that type of sort of persistent tracking, those cameras combined with algorithms like facial recognition algorithms truly create a landscape in the near future, if we don't stop it, where a government official sitting behind a desk in a fusion center, unknown to anybody in the public, can type in someone's name into a computer and then see automatically a record of everywhere that person went in public, every person that person was walking with or near in public space, every time they went to a protest, every time they were seen entering a cannabis shop, a strip club, you name it. The list goes on, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, etc. So the risks to our core freedoms, the right to be left alone, the right to be able to associate with who we want to without the government tracking us, the right to speak our minds at a protest or even to blow the whistle to the Boston Globe about corruption in the local government. All of these issues come up when we think about a system that enables the government to track who you are, where you go, what you do, and who you know, permanently, and not just for one person, but for all people, merely with the push of a button. This is the type of surveillance that can be done not only in real time. I think people oftentimes think about Minority Report type scenes where, the police will use a system like this to find a person in a crowd at a train station, for example. That's a real concern. We're also concerned about looking back, right? If you have 5 years of video footage, you might not be, a suspect today or a person of interest to the government today. What happens if you elect a local Donald Trump, right? They might want to know where you were every day for the past 5 years. And as long as there's video footage for those past 5 years, these technologies enable that kind of persistent tracking, looking forward and looking back.
Well, that sounds pretty scary. It also, I think, goes to some of the points that Claire has been making about the so-called perpetual lineup. People remember in the movies, you go grab some suspects, you put them behind a mirrored glass, you have a lineup, and somebody's supposed to pick out the bad guy. You're talking about the perpetual lineup. Talk a little bit about the key findings of that report.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on. So back in 2016, the Center on Privacy and Technology released a report. We called it the Perpetual Lineup on Regulated Police Face Recognition in America. And our findings were essentially face recognition is incredibly widespread, and over half of all American adults are in a perpetual lineup, not because over half of us have had interaction with law enforcement, but because we chose to get a driver's license. states, 31 states at least across the country, allow law enforcement officers to request or directly run searches for a criminal investigation of our driver's license. We actually found later that in 3 states that give undocumented immigrants driver privilege cards, or the right to legally drive under state law, they were also giving ICE access to those photos as well, which is incredibly concerning. It sets up an impossible situation for an undocumented immigrant who wants to take part in a legal process that their state is allowing them. We found that over a quarter of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies that we have across the country had access to a face recognition system, and this is probably a vast underestimation of how many systems are out there. And we found that there was not much research at the time, but even back in 2016, the research was showing that there was this racial bias issue, that not only were poor and Black and brown communities in the US disproportionately likely to be, for the technology to be used on them, they were disproportionately likely to be enrolled in the databases, in particularly mugshot databases and arrestee databases, and the technology was going to perform the least likely on that exact group of people.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is it, if you could make it more accurate and clean up the data, they talk about garbage in, garbage out. Would you feel better about it if you just cleaned up some of that stuff and got more accurate, Claire?
Not at all, and for 2 main reasons. One is the reason that Cade mentioned. These systems they're either terrible at doing what they're doing, and they're going to effectuate bias and misidentification rates at disproportionate rates on certain people, or we're going to get a perfect surveillance system that perfectly identifies us as we're going to a women's health clinic or our local church, or to pick our children up from school. So a perfect system is just as scary, just in a very different way. And the other thing is, it doesn't matter how good the technology gets if we don't have rules around how it's used. So face recognition has been used as an investigative tool in the US since 2001. This is what keeps me up at night. There are no rules about how it can be used. What we've found is that law enforcement officers submit forensic sketches, so sketches of faces to face recognition systems, celebrity lookalikes. So not even the person that they're looking for, they find a celebrity lookalike to submit to face recognition systems.
Why would they do that?
That's a really good question. Face recognition at its very, very basic core is a very imperfect, very inaccurate biometric technique. You cannot submit someone else's biometrics to find somebody. That's just not how biometrics work. That's the opposite of how they work. And yet the NYPD has done that on at least 2 occasions. On one occasion, looking for a beer thief, submitted a photo of Woody Harrelson to their face recognition system, and did land up making an arrest of someone who was not Woody Harrelson on the basis of that search. So it doesn't matter how good the technology gets. If law enforcement can submit, as you mentioned, garbage into their data, into their algorithms, they can only expect garbage results. And yet they've been making arrests on the basis of these results for almost 20 years.
Well, let me ask anybody just the obvious question, which is, if you have a certain point of view, you think the government's scary and you think law enforcement's scary and you don't want them to have these super weapons. But what about the people who are saying, well, maybe you catch more terrorists, maybe you catch more bad guys, maybe you catch more people snatching babies, maybe you catch, what do you say? What do you say to people who say, hey, look, I don't mind if you see me going to the CME church. I'm proud to go to the CME church. Put me in there. Grab the scary terrorists. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the reality of the situation and the assumption for how these systems work don't always add up. So let's talk about the example of catch a terrorist. There was actually a Brown University senior at the time who was misidentified as a terrorist suspect in the Sri Lanka Easter bombings. she wasn't in Sri Lanka. And so it's not a situation where you are sold this fiction, right, that might sound enticing or might even be well-intentioned. But when we look at the reality, right, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, they did a survey showing 189 algorithms, and they showed that Asian and African American faces 10 to 100 times more likely to have failures than white faces. So it's not just a situation where, oh, this technology is ready to be deployed and there are not going to be any consequences. So you're being sold a narrative that when you look at the actuality isn't necessarily the case. So even if you're like, oh yeah, sure, let's go use this, are you sending parachutes with holes?
If I could, Dan,
I
would answer that question in a kind of different way, which is to say a couple different things. One, in the United States, at least, the founders of this country, who obviously were wrong about a lot, were right at least about the Fourth Amendment. I think most Americans would agree that you don't want the police to have the authority to barge down your front door and rummage through your home desk without a warrant, right? Those types of common sense restrictions on state and police power protect not only public safety and personal privacy, they also protect the integrity of criminal investigations and ensure that police are actually going after people who are seriously suspected of serious wrongdoing. So, there's been a huge nationwide uprising all over the country since the spring in the wake of George Floyd's killing. And I think a lot of people in this country, particularly Black and brown people who have had bad experiences with the police, but also fellow white people like me who have watched our Black and brown friends be disproportionately arrested or brutalized or seen things happen to our neighbors, or just don't think that we ought to live in a country where systemic racism is doled out by the people who are supposed to keep us safe. I would ask people to think about who works for their local police department, about who works for their local sheriff's department. Because the reality is that police are human beings. The people who work in the institutions that have technologies like this are human beings who are subject to their own prejudices, their own maybe abusive tendencies, just like all people are. This may seem like an extreme example, but one of the most interesting cases, I think, in the past few years where forensic science was used to find a really dangerous criminal was the case in California where an experimental DNA technique was used to find a serial killer who had terrorized women up and down the coast in California for decades. It turned out that serial killer was a police officer for the entire time that he was killing and raping dozens of women. So just imagine what a serial killer who intends to harm lots of people would be able to do with a technology like this. And that is why we have rules in a society. That is why we have checks and balances on people who we give a lot of power, is because those people are subject to their own, errors, foibles, biases. Sometimes those people actually do mean us harm, and we need to have rules in place to ensure that they cannot use systems like this to harm people even more effectively and efficiently. The serial killer example is a really extreme one. I'm more concerned, honestly, about the police using a technology like this to make racial profiling and the targeted harassment of Black and brown people more efficient. There are some laws that I think ought to be reformed. Should people be going to prison because they have a dime bag of heroin in their pocket and they have a disease? I don't think so. A technology like this, as Claire said, makes it possible for perfect enforcement of the law, which I think is honestly terrifying in a free society.
Well, makes me want to ask Shalini a couple of questions. In the documentary itself, there's some pretty, striking examples, including one of a young guy who gets, stopped by the police wrongfully. This is a kind of example of an imperfect enforcement of the law. And I think that really, drove the point home in the film. How did you film stuff like that? I mean, that's not mean, unless it's happening like 1,000 times a minute, I just imagine, just as a filmmaker, how'd you capture that? I think you may be muted.
Yes, I mean, I think that I watched that scene many times over in the edit, and I don't think I ever watched it without like getting shivers in my spine, because I felt like that's a moment where that is a child. First of all, he's in school uniform wearing a suit, and that you see these 5 plainclothes police officers sort of descend on him. And I think that for me, we had to go to the UK to actually get a scene like that, relying on research from Big Brother Watch UK, a human rights watch group that was observing them. And it was only in the UK that I could even observe police use of facial recognition, because they have laws there, because it's Europe. And so they have the GDPR, and so the police would actually disclose to human rights observers when they were trialing this technology. So you can imagine, as horrifying as that scene is, you can just imagine how much more serious and grave it is when it's being used in secret.
I just think about you as a filmmaker, and kind of you make a lot of brave choices. It'd be a lot easier if you're Shalini Kantaya to do stuff about, I don't know, just frivolous stuff. Maybe easier to make, might be easier to sell. Why do you keep taking on these really hard things like climate change and AI bigots and all this type of stuff? What's wrong with you? Why are you doing all this hard stuff?
Well, I think it gives me meaning, but I also think it's people like Joy and Kate and Claire that inspire me to believe that the world can change. And I think that, I'm a real believer that films can change the world, because people have the experience of empathy, that people empathize with someone radically different than them. I heard people who were like, what I really actually believe is that people may not care about bias in AI, but they care about joy. And so when they see Joy go on a journey in coded bias, they start to care about bias in AI. Mm-hmm. And so it is it's my hope that the documentaries kind of shine a light on everyday heroes. And it's my hope that they can inspire other people to sort of rise, to sort of engage and because what I actually have seen that everyday people can make a difference. It's not actually something very Pollyanna. Mm-hmm. Like I've actually seen Kate Crawford and the ACLU ban police recognition in Boston. Just point blank, and Claire testified before Congress, and the dial keeps moving, and Joy transform an industry. And so what I've learned is that the tech companies or big power is not the enemy. It's actually our apathy. It's our ability to care. And so it's my belief that films are actually the vehicle that make people care, or can be.
Well, your films do, for sure, and we appreciate you. Speaking of joy, we said people care about joy. People do care about their personal joy, and they also care about you. And I hope that more people care more about you after this film and afterwards. But you call yourself the poet of code, kind of bringing the left brain and the right brain together, and I think that's a big part of why you've been able to be as effective as you are. Talk a little bit about that metaphor for you in terms of poetry. Talk a little bit about the Algorithmic Justice League. Just give us a little bit more insight into your cause and your calling and everything that you're up to.
Sure. I'm a poet of code, telling stories that make daughters of diasporas dream and sons of privilege pause. So that's Poet of Code, POC. And what poets do is they illuminate the uncomfortable, or they represent something that you might think you already know something about. And so in so much as with the Algorithmic Justice League, we're using art and research to show you AI, to show you tech in a different light. And we're also saying that it's not just about performance metrics, right? It's also how people feel and understand. So when I take the results of an algorithmic audit and turn it into a spoken word poem, what resonates with people are lines like, can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Or Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Or to end with, no label is worthy of our data because, or no label is really worthy of our beauty, because it's at the end our humanity. And that's what we're bringing forth with the Algorithmic Justice League, saying the heart of computing has to be humanity. We are centering those who are most marginalized. We're centering those who are most harmed, so that there's actually a place you can go, knowing that you have people who are there to advocate for you, to mitigate harms, and to also invite more people in. So yes, I have a computer science background. I have 3 degrees, working on my 4th PhD from MIT, and I feel the power is not my expertise as a technologist, but the experience and the importance of being able to share what coding in a white mask meant to me, and then to see people like Trinae, who you'll see in the film, then take that research and use it for advocacy in their own community to say, we don't want our landlord to put face recognition into our system, into our home. And now we have the language, right, to push back against it. And so that's part of what we do with the Algorithmic Justice League. Also say, if you have a face, you have a place in the conversation. You can be a poet, you can be an activist, you can be an academic. Everybody is part of this because the people have a voice, the people have a choice, and we choose to live in a society that's free of surveillance.
We can drop the mic on that. Bars, bars. Look, I love everything that you're saying. I think you're opening up a whole new vistas and possibilities for human expression and human freedom in this century. And you mentioned Ida B. Wells. She's looking at you with a great deal of pride. You're carrying that torch forward, and we appreciate you very, very much. You did mention activism, and I want to give both Kate and Claire opportunities before we go to other questions, just to talk about what can folk do. Claire, you went to Congress and spoke truth to power. What can people do if they care about this? I'm going to give Kate. Obviously, you had such a big victory in Massachusetts, and then we're going to get to some of these other questions. But Claire, what do you want folks to do?
I want folks to get involved. This is not about, yes, I am a lawyer and I had the amazing privilege to testify before Congress, but guess how I learned all the information I know about face recognition? It was filing Freedom of Information Act requests, which literally everyone in this country can do from their home. You don't even need a computer. You have the right to information about how your tax dollars are being used, about how police are policing your communities. So if you don't know and you want to, you can ask them, and don't take no for an answer. I have received over 30,000 pages of records on how law enforcement across the country use this technology. I've shared those with the world, but there is so much more information out there that's accessible to everybody. I know we have a note from how high schoolers can get involved. High schoolers, you can send FOIA requests. You can speak truth to power in that way and exercise your right to gain access.
And when Claire says FOIA requests, she said Freedom of Information Act. You can use a search engine to figure out what she's talking about. It's Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, FOIA. And basically it's making the government tell you stuff. You don't have to go with conspiracy theories and all kind of weird stuff from your friends on Facebook. You can actually just tell the government to tell you, and the government's got to do it. So thanks for talking about that, Claire. And then Cade, people want to make sure their local law enforcement folks aren't doing dumb stuff and mean stuff with these algorithms, or if there's something else you want people to do, talk to us about it.
Thanks. I love this question. Joy said that it takes, if you have a face, you have a place, and it has really been incredible how useful Joy's research has been in the fight to bring democratic control over this technology in Massachusetts and across the country. So here in Massachusetts, we've passed 7 local bans on facial recognition technology. One in Brookline, Coolidge Corner, shout out. So, you know, in the future, when the pandemic is over and you're walking down the street in Brookline to go to the movies, you don't have to worry about the police tracking your face because it's prohibited in the town of Brookline. Same in Springfield and Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, a bunch of other communities in our state, but that's only 7 of 15 of these prohibitions that have been passed throughout the country. Some in California, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine. I cannot stress enough how exciting and empowering it is to get involved in local politics, right? So there's a cliche, all politics is local. But you know what? All policing is local as well in the United States. And so, you know, on a lot of things, climate, oh, that feels like so big. How do you get your city council to have a real impact on climate? There are things we can do, but they're relatively small compared to the power of Congress on a huge issue like that. On an issue like this, you can have a huge impact, not only on your community, but literally on the entire country and the world. We have been able to change the conversation with the collaboration of people like Joy and Claire, my colleagues at the ACLU and many allied organizations across the country about this technology, not just in the United States, but across the world, by saying, you know what, it's not inevitable. If we, the people, decide we don't want this used on us in our own backyards, we can go to our city councils, we can lobby them, and we can pass bans to ensure that this stuff is not used in our schools, on our streets, and by our police departments. And that's exactly what we've done. So not only is all politics local in the sense that you can have an impact on the police, but your Congress people are going to notice. If you pass a ban on face surveillance in your community, your senators and your Congress people are going to read about that in the paper, and you're going to help us build the momentum that we need to get some national action on this in DC. So please reach out to your local ACLU if you're interested in this issue. To the question from the student, contact, get some other students involved, educate them on the issue, watch Coded Bias together, and then organize. Find a teacher at your school who wants to help. Go to your school committee and tell them, we want to ban face surveillance. We don't want to be tracked like this in our school. You absolutely have the power to do that. And I will help you. So find my information online.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to speak to the activism side just a little bit. The Algorithmic Justice League is recruiting. We need agents. So come on board, support us. Again, all kinds of backgrounds are welcome. One of my favorite things we've done with AJL, besides getting big tech to do a 180, is a project called Drag versus AI. We worked with ACLU Massachusetts and the Boston Public Library with local teens. And we did this, we also worked with local drag queens. And essentially it's a hands-on workshop where you get to learn about how face recognition technologies actually perform, but then you actually do drag or whatever else to see if you can be invisible, or if you can change your gender perception, or if you can look like somebody else. And just the reception to that. We just did a Halloween edition, which was really fun, but it's a way of engaging people who might be like, yeah, I got some makeup. I usually don't wear a lot of makeup, so we do found objects around the house or whatever else. But you see how these systems are not perfect, but you also quickly see why collective action is necessary and what we can do together as a community. And also at ajl.org, there's so many different resources where you can go learn and educate others. But also I want to emphasize the importance of telling your story, right? My story of coding in a white mask is what led to this whole exploration, and now we're here. But not to think that, oh, I don't have a PhD from XYZ, or I'm not a lawyer, or maybe I'm a little bit shy, or whatever else it is. But the power of your story, the power of your experience is so vital and important. And so I would encourage you to share your stories, share your questions as well, and invite others to do the same.
Well, look, that's awesome. And look, we've got 3 questions in about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to start banging through them. But I really love what you're saying about the way that some of our communities that have been marginalized by the mainstream actually may have the seeds and the source of freeing everybody. People in drag communities know an awful lot of stuff that winds up being survival wisdom in this situation. And I love that. I also, since I can't spell Algorithmic Justice League, I'm glad to know that I can just say ajl.org.
Very simple.
Same place, ajl.org. And also, again, people who are new to this stuff, when you say the ACLU, that's the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Been around for a long time, been fighting this stuff for a long time. So, you got the newest groups like the AJL, you got the older groups like the ACLU being brought up to speed by folks like Kate. There's a big thing that's happening, and a lot of people probably didn't know anything about it. So I'm glad we have a film to introduce everybody to this movement. That said, Victoria wants to know, how would you encourage our business students to promote ethical and equality-based inquiries as they move into data-driven workplaces? Say something to our business students. Anybody?
Yeah, so to the business students out there, and as a entrepreneur myself who got into computer science wanting to make a little bit of cash and a little bit of impact, I would definitely say think about the potential harms of the systems that you're creating, and also think about what I like to call algorithmic hygiene, right? So if you're using AI systems, is there affirmative consent? Do people even know that these systems are being used in the first place? Is there meaningful transparency? If you want to invest in AI or use an AI product, you could be opening yourself up to class action lawsuits if you don't know what's under the hood. So it's to your benefit to understand the capabilities and the limitations. And then to the hygienic part, right? Continuous oversight. You wouldn't say, oh, we addressed bias once in 2020 and we done. 2021, you might stink. And so this process of always knowing how your systems or how the technology you've developed is working in the real world is important. And part of this is making sure you have mechanisms for true community engagement. And it's so easy to think you might introduce technology to solve other people's problems without actually bringing the people who are most impacted into the community. So not designing for, but designing with. And I would highly encourage also for the business students to check out the book Design Justice by Dr. Sasha Costanza-Chalk, who's also a senior research fellow for the Algorithmic Justice League, because it does get into what does it mean to operationalize this desire to proceed with business in a way where we're thinking about equity, we're thinking about accountability, we're thinking about responsibility. We don't have to accept the lie that to be responsible means you can't be innovative.
Two quick things I'd add to that, which was amazing. One is to echo what Joy said about think about your end user. We've seen, I joke that part of my job is to think about what the worst actor possible would do with these tools. And there's such a thing as a bad innovation and a bad idea that maybe was fun to develop, but doesn't have a positive application, or it maybe does, but the negative implications are so dire. And the thing that comes to mind is the what was called the gaydar study out of Stanford, an algorithm that purported to be able to tell who was more gay out of a group of two people. I'm not sure what the positive application of this is. Completely honestly, I don't understand. The negative implication, imagine a country like Saudi Arabia where it's punishable by death to be gay. That could be your potential client. Just think, it sounds very, very dire, but think through that. And then the second thing I'd say, which seems obvious, but they're saying, because what we found in our initial research is there's this assumption that race blind means race neutral. Just because my system isn't looking for race means it's completely neutral. That's just not true in any way, shape, or form. So just don't confuse race blindness with neutrality or any sort of equity or equality in a system.
Well, look, all this stuff is really good. And I wonder when people watch the film Coded Bias at the end, Shalini, is there any list of these books or whatever? Is there a website where, because there's a lot of resources being talked about. Or you just go to ajl.org.
Yeah, you should go to AJL. They are also one of the resources listed on the Coded Bias website. It's where you screen the film, and it's also where you'll find the ACLU and AJL, and we have to add Georgetown Law, but we will. And we have so many resources, and all the reading material of the incredible, brilliant cast is on the website for people to read.
That's really, really good. Look, we're getting. Somebody said read it out. We're getting really close on time, and I know we have a hard stop in 4 minutes. Let me just read the other two questions. Codedbias.com. Codedbias.com is one place you can go besides ajl.org. I don't keep meaning to say ajl.org. I just want people to remember ajl.org. So let me get these last two questions. And Stephanie says, in my work, we're trying to develop toolkits to help our content producers challenge their own assumptions and biases. What types of questions or tools would you recommend to help people and businesses think more critically about data and algorithms and tech? We may have already covered that, but that's a question from Stephanie. And then from Adama, or Adama, but I think Adama, California's Prop 25 had us choose between cash bail or algorithmic-based risk assessments to grant or deny release for incarcerated people. Can anybody speak to their reactions on this and other AI decisions that were up for a vote? So one question is about tools, and the other question is about politics. And we got 3 minutes. Who wants to talk?
All right, well, I'll jump in and answer the last question quickly first, just by saying that algorithmic risk assessment tools are a bad idea. There's a lot that's been written about this. I would recommend the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights put out a statement, I believe it was 1.5 years, 2 years ago, that was signed by the ACLU and 100 other organizations across the country, laying out in detail why algorithmic risk assessment tools are a bad idea for the criminal legal system. I would also say, though, that cash bail is a bad idea and that people should just not be in jail if they haven't been convicted of a crime. That imagine that, innocent until proven guilty. On the other question, though, I just wanted to add one thing, which is that there's a famous quote about machine learning, which is that machine learning is a great tool if you want to make the future look like the past. So to people who, and the reason for that is that you train a machine learning algorithm on historical data. And the United States, obviously, is a country that has been dealing for hundreds of years with systemic racism. It was only 100 years ago that women got the right to vote. This country has very significant problems in our recent history, obviously in the present. But, if we're looking at using historical banking or credit or housing or criminal justice data to train models to make predictions or to put out scores about the future, you're likely going to be replicating the historical problems that we've had by laundering them through new technology. So to Joy's point, sometimes, or maybe it was Claire who said this, sometimes there are just things you shouldn't do with machine learning technology.
I want to give Shalini the last word. All you guys are extraordinary, and this film is extraordinary, but nobody's more extraordinary than Shalini. So Shalini, take us out of here.
This is friend bias going on right here. But first of all, I just want to thank the incredible panel. I want to thank the incredible, brilliant, and badass cast of the film, all of the 71 theaters, and everybody at home who's watching this movie. Please share Coded Bias. We aim for it to be the kind of inconvenient truth of big tech algorithms, and to shine a light on this issue that has incredible impact on our future of civil rights and democracy. So I want to thank the panelists and Van for doing such an incredible job. And I hope to see you at the movies. Codedbias.com, virtual cinema. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening. This is the kind of movement that everybody should be supporting, and the leadership of a new crop of justice warriors. You guys look like the new century, and we're behind you. We got your back.
Wait, one quick second, and Joy is going to give us one gift to close us out. She, the poet of code herself, is going to close us out with a gift of poem. So thank you all so much for being here and the work that you're doing towards a better world. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm so excited to close this out with a poem that you'll hear bits and snatches in the film that I wrote to the Brooklyn tenants who I felt so inspired by with their successful resistance of invasive facial recognition in their homes. And so I hope you enjoy. To the Brooklyn tenants resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces, we celebrate your courage. No silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, hallway gathering, Sharpies and posters, coalitions, petitions, testimonies, letters, research and potlucks, dancing and music, storytellers like Shalini, activists like Cade, lawyers like Claire, journalists like Van, everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, persisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction, we stand with you in gratitude. You show the people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the victory is ours. Thank you.